comfort is not the same thing as safety, and familiarity doesn't always mean you're home. I once sat across from a woman who said, "I would rather be miserable with him than alone with myself." That sentence stayed with me for years, not because she was broken, but because she was honest. And that honesty cracked something open in me, because so many of us have been conditioned to believe that loneliness is worse than disrespect, that being wanted, even if it's harmful, is better than walking away alone. But here's what the research says and what life experience confirms. Going back to a toxic relationship is not healing. It's repetition, and repetition of pain isn't love. It's trauma. And we deserve more than survival. We deserve to live. Emotional familiarity isn't emotional safety. When people say it felt like home, my first question is, but what kind of home? Because for a lot of us, home wasn't peace and warmth and acceptance. Home was tension. Home was walking on eggshells. Home was watching the mood of the room before you dared to speak. So when we grow up inside emotional chaos, our nervous systems adapt, and they learn to call that chaos normal. And later in life, when we meet someone who mirrors that same emotional unpredictability, guess what? We don't run, we lean in. It feels familiar, it feels like home. But that emotional familiarity, it's not safety. It's a memory of survival. I've sat with people who were in relationships where they felt consistently dismissed, minimized, even emotionally manipulated. And yet, when they talked about leaving, there was this ache in their voice, not just of sadness, but of confusion. Why do I miss someone who hurt me? Why does it still feel like they're the only one who really gets me? That confusion isn't weakness. It's your brain doing what it was trained to do, associate familiarity with safety. Here's what the research tells us. The brain doesn't just crave comfort, it craves patterns. It wants to recognize and repeat what it knows because that repetition gives a sense of control, even if what it knows is pain. That's why trauma bonds are so powerful. When someone alternates between affection and withdrawal, warmth and coldness, praise and punishment, it creates a loop, one that's deeply emotional and deeply chemical. It's not love, it's reinforcement. And the longer you stay, the more your body begins to believe that roller coaster is the price of connection. So when we say it's hard to leave, we're not just talking about emotional attachment. We're talking about a neurobiological entanglement. That's real. That's valid. And it's exactly why going back feels easier than staying gone, because the familiar chaos is more comfortable than the silent stretch of healing. But here's what I need you to hear. What feels familiar isn't always what's good for you. Sometimes the relationship that feels like home is actually the place where you learned to abandon yourself. The place where you learned to prioritize someone else's comfort over your own safety. The place where you became small so someone else wouldn't feel insecure. That is not love, that is survival. And survival isn't supposed to be your forever story. I've had to sit with my own patterns, had to ask myself if I was calling something chemistry when it was actually a trauma echo. That's the hard part. It takes brutal honesty and self-compassion to say, this feels right, but it's not. Because the rightness is coming from your history, not your healing. What's wild is the first time you experience true emotional safety, when someone listens without interrupting, honors your no, celebrates your boundaries, it can actually feel boring, anticlimactic, even suspicious. Because your nervous system is used to drama, not peace. But peace is not boring. Peace is safe. And over time, your body will learn that safety is where it can finally exhale. That it's not supposed to be a fight. It's supposed to be a sanctuary. So if you're tempted to go back just because it feels like home, ask yourself, was home a place you felt safe, or was it the place you learned to survive? Because going back to what's familiar might feel comforting in the moment, but healing starts when you stop confusing pain with love and begin choosing what actually feels like peace. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. That line isn't just poetic, it's neuroscience, it's emotional truth. It's the thing we don't want to admit when we're standing at the door of a relationship we know is hurting us, but still hoping maybe this time will be different. I've heard people say, but we've got history, or they said they'd change, or even they've started therapy. And while I honor every step toward growth, truly, I also know that healing requires space, clarity, and a new emotional landscape. And if the relationship environment is still laced with the same dynamics that left you doubting your worth, you're not healing. You're re-entering the cycle. Think of it like this. Imagine trying to recover from smoke inhalation while staying inside the burning house. That's what it's like when we try to heal inside the relationship that caused the wound. Even if some of the flames are gone, the air is still thick with what hurt you. And every time you try to breathe, you're reminded of the fire. One of the hardest truths I've had to learn personally and professionally is that you can love someone deeply and still be unsafe with them. But that's the thing about toxic relationships. They're not always cruel on the surface. Sometimes the toxicity hides in subtle digs, in power plays, in the way you feel small when you speak your truth. Sometimes the toxicity is emotional inconsistency, where affection is a reward and silence is a punishment. And when we try to heal in that environment, what actually happens is we become experts in emotional contortion. We twist ourselves into someone more likable, more agreeable, more tolerable, just to keep the peace. That's not growth, that's survival. And healing can't happen while you're still performing. The research is pretty clear on this too. Psychologists studying trauma recovery talk about regulation before restoration, meaning you can't restore your emotional health until your nervous system has space to feel safe. You can't do the deep work of rebuilding self-worth while also scanning for micro-rejections or calculating the safest way to speak your needs. Your brain is wired to protect you from danger, not to thrive in it. And look, I understand the temptation to stay. I really do. Sometimes it's financial. Sometimes it's about children. Sometimes it's just the fear of the unknown. But the truth is, staying in a toxic space because you're afraid of starting over is like choosing a slow emotional erosion over the courage to rebuild. And rebuilding is scary, yes, but it's also sacred. When you step out of what hurt you, even when it's messy, even when you still miss them, what you're saying is, I believe there's something better for me, even if I can't see it yet. That belief, that's the beginning of healing. That's the moment you stop trying to fix what broke you and start building something that honors who you're becoming. Because healing doesn't happen in the proving, it happens in the pausing, in the stillness, in the space where you're no longer defending yourself just to be loved. And that space, it's not selfish, it's necessary. Change without accountability isn't real change. I wish I could tell you how many times I've heard someone say, but they promised things would be different. And every single time, there's a pause after that sentence, a long, quiet breath. Because deep down, we know the difference between a promise and a pattern. But when you're exhausted and aching and you want to believe, it's easier to cling to hope than to face reality. And hope without boundaries can become a very dangerous thing. Let me be clear. I believe in change. I've seen people turn their lives around, mend relationships, and grow in ways that are extraordinary. But none of that happened just because they said they would change. It happened because they did something consistently, with humility, over time, and most importantly, with accountability. When we're talking about going back to someone who has caused us emotional harm or who's shown a pattern of toxic behavior, we need to ask ourselves, what has actually changed? Not what they said, not what they promised after a tearful apology, but what are they doing daily to create safety, honesty, and respect? Because if someone is truly committed to healing, Their change won't be conditional on whether you take them back. It will be visible with or without your presence. Accountability isn't just about saying, I'm sorry. It's about acknowledging harm, taking responsibility, seeking help, making amends, and then repeating that process consistently. It's not a moment. It's a lifestyle. When we accept an apology without seeing any behavioral shifts, we're not choosing forgiveness. We're choosing to silence our own fear for the sake of comfort. One of the hardest things I've learned, both in the research and in real life, is that words without aligned behavior aren't compassion, they're manipulation. Because people who aren't ready to do the work will say just enough to keep you tethered, to keep you hoping, without ever actually changing the dynamic. It's like emotional breadcrumbing, just enough to keep you coming back, but never enough to feel whole. And let's be honest, holding someone accountable is uncomfortable. It requires boundaries. It means you might say, I see the words, but I'm not seeing the work. And until I do, I can't come back. That's hard, especially if you still love them. But boundaries aren't punishment. They're clarity. They say, I love you enough to want better for both of us. In emotionally toxic relationships, the pattern is often the same. Conflict, apology, honeymoon period, repeat. That cycle isn't transformation, it's trauma. And the longer you stay in that loop, the harder it becomes to trust your own instincts. That's why accountability isn't just about them. It's about you. It's about reclaiming your right to feel safe, to trust your gut, and to not second guess your boundaries. So yes, people can change, but real change, it's not a text at 2 a.m. saying, I miss you and I'll do better. It's therapy appointments. It's difficult conversations. It's taking responsibility for the hurt they caused without blaming your reactions. And most of all, it's respect. The kind that shows up when no one's watching, when there's no guarantee of a reward. And if that's not there, if the only thing they're offering you is a promise, they're not ready for the kind of relationship you deserve. Love shouldn't hurt you more than it holds you. Somewhere along the way, we've romanticized pain. We've started confusing struggle with depth, chaos with passion, and emotional wounds with proof that we care. We've internalized these narratives that say, if it's messy, it must be real. Or if it hurts, that's how you know it matters. But let me tell you, love is not meant to be an emotional battlefield. That idea that love has to be hard all the time, that's not resilience, that's conditioning. Real love, the kind that nourishes and strengthens you, doesn't require you to abandon yourself just to be accepted. It doesn't demand that you become quieter, smaller, or more agreeable in order to keep someone else comfortable. And yet so many of us have stayed in relationships that chipped away at our spirit because we were told love means sacrifice. But when sacrifice starts to look like self-erasure, it's no longer love. It's surrendering your truth for someone else's ease. Now, I'm not saying relationships are always smooth. Conflict is normal. Disagreements happen. Growth can be messy. But there's a difference between healthy discomfort, where both people are working toward better, and emotional harm, where you're constantly the one making room, shrinking, apologizing, and explaining yourself just to survive the connection. In emotionally toxic relationships, the tension doesn't come and go. It lives in your chest. You wake up with it. You go to sleep with it. You find yourself calculating your words before you speak, walking around on alert, reading between the lines of every text message. That's not love. That's emotional exhaustion. And when I talk to people who are trying to leave these relationships or already have but are thinking about going back, they'll say things like, but we have this bond, or no one else knows me like they do. But when we dig deeper, what they often mean is no one else has seen me hurt like that. No one else has had that much power over me. That's not connection. That's vulnerability weaponized. And when vulnerability becomes a tool someone uses to control or diminish you, that's abuse dressed up as intimacy. You deserve to feel safe in love. You deserve to feel seen, not just when you're agreeable or useful, but when you're whole and complicated and standing in your truth. And if someone says they love you, but constantly puts you down, gaslights you, ignores your boundaries, or makes your needs feel like a burden, that is not love. That is control. And here's what I've learned. When you've spent years normalizing emotional pain, peace can feel uncomfortable. You'll meet someone who listens, who doesn't raise their voice, who respects your space. And your first instinct might be to pull away, to question it, to wonder what's wrong with them, because your body is still bracing for harm. That's not because you're broken. It's because your nervous system has been rewired to expect pain as part of connection. But healing is possible. And when you start unlearning those patterns, you'll begin to recognize love for what it actually is: gentle, respectful, consistent. Love doesn't mean never being challenged, but it does mean never being diminished. So if the love you're holding on to hurts more than it heals, if it's making you question your worth, your voice, your sanity, then maybe it's not love at all. Maybe it's a lesson. And the most loving thing you can do is walk away, not because you don't care, but because you finally do. The courage to stay gone is a radical act of self-respect. There's this idea we carry, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, that walking away is the brave part. And it is. That moment when you finally say enough, when you pack the last bag, send the final text, or cry in your car in the grocery store parking lot, that takes guts. But let me tell you something most people won't. The braver moment often comes later. It comes in the silence. The stillness when no one's watching, when the loneliness starts whispering lies. And in those moments, the courage it takes to stay gone, that's something sacred. Because here's what no one talks about. Leaving is a decision, but staying gone, that's a practice. When you've left a toxic relationship, you don't just walk away from a person, you walk away from a pattern, a dynamic, a version of yourself that learned how to survive in that chaos. And while your mind might know you made the right choice, your body will still crave what it was conditioned to tolerate. Not because you want more pain, but because the quiet after toxicity can feel unbearable when you've spent so long mistaking drama for affection. I've talked to people, strong, smart, self-aware people, who left and then went back. Not once, sometimes 2, 3, 5 times. And you know what? I don't judge that, because healing isn't linear, and leaving something you once called love is messy, especially when that love was woven into your routines, your identity, your daily rhythm. So yes, walking away is hard. But when the nights get quiet and you wonder if maybe you were too sensitive, too reactive, too demanding, that's when the real bravery kicks in. That's when you remember that respect isn't earned by shrinking, it's honored by standing tall and staying true to your boundaries, even when you miss them. There is something deeply powerful about saying, I could go back, but I won't. That's not bitterness. That's not pride. That's healing. It's choosing the discomfort of growth over the comfort of dysfunction. And that's what self-respect looks like in practice. It's not loud or flashy. It's not revenge or rebound or proving anything to anyone. It's quiet, steady. It's you whispering to yourself, I deserve more than bare minimums and broken apologies. Staying gone also means you're